We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And before we started this episode, had a few little technical glitches. We'll see how it goes this week. Apologies for last week. Cut out like one question before we had truly intended to, but that's just the way the tech things went. But more important than all of that, Tom, how are you feeling? Because last week you were pretty rough.
I don't know. So I went on my first bike ride on Saturday and felt okay. And then Sunday I woke up feeling like I was as hungover as I've ever been.
Oh, wow.
And which is disappointing because I did the time but didn't do the crime. The night before I drank nothing but water. So, I mean, literally nothing but water. We went out to a restaurant, everybody else was having drinks and I was having water. So I was I'm not really sure. And I feel a little brain foggy.
Yeah.
Just a slight bit, like I can't explain it. Like I tried to explain it to my wife. It's sort of like when Benadryl first starts to kick in. I feel just a little bit out of sorts, if that makes sense. But nothing like super. I can't like pin it down and like describe it perfectly. It's just I just feel a little off. Yep. But physically I seem to be fine. I've been on another. I went riding yesterday. I didn't ride today. I went riding yesterday, which was Monday, and seemed to do fine. Don't really feel it when don't feel any physical after effects, not like shortness of breath or problems breathing or, muscle fatigue or anything like that, but just a little bit of brain fog. I think. I don't really know.
Cough seems to have subsided, so hopefully that's
we'll
a positive
see.
sign. We'll see how it goes.
I thought it was subsided last week too, but we'll see.
Kicked in at the end there.
It did, and I don't know. I just need to stop talking for a while. That was the problem there, which I think a lot of people would agree that I should do less of anyways, especially my wife. But let's get to what we watched. Rob, what did you watch?
I ventured out to the theater and saw Ant-Man and The Wasp: Quantumania, the first movie in Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe now. It's officially kicking off Phase 5. There really didn't seem like much of a grand finale to Phase 4, so
there wasn't.
It's a little bit difficult to delineate.
I think the COVID pandemic sort of disrupted all those. I think there was a definite plan, and I don't think that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was supposed to be the kickoff initially of this. I thought it was,
don't know. I mean, things definitely got a bit disrupted. If you've been following the news over at Disney with Bob Iger coming back as CEO, he's like, we're gonna slow down on the releasing of the 5 Marvel movies and 6 series a year kind of cadence that they were on there.
I don't normally agree with CEOs just on general principle, but I can get behind that decision. I think that even I, who does love all this stuff, was getting to the point I was like, man, y'all need to give me a break. I need I'd like to rewatch Loki, and I'd like to rewatch some of the other stuff that's come out just so I can really digest it, but I can't because you've already got, the Bad Batch season 2 is out and this is out and that is out, and I'm like, I got no time for all that.
Yeah,
so go on.
I'm all right with that. So as far as Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I thought it was fine. Thought it was all right. It's somewhere in the middle of the pack of MCU movies for my taste.
That's what I've heard.
Out of the 3 Ant-Man movies, it was probably my least favorite just in terms of like how I felt about it, because it wasn't as funny and it wasn't as heartfelt because it was a save the universe movie as opposed to the 2 previous Ant-Man movies were a little bit more personal and smaller. And that was on purpose. The previous 2 Ant-Man movies were kind of like amuse-bouche. They were like palate cleansers from the gigantic events that just immediately preceded them. This one is like, no, this is the giant kickoff everything event. So it had a considerably different feel from the 2 other Ant-Man movies. So in that sense, as a trilogy, I don't really think it like has a proper through line just as a trilogy of movies. This is its own sort of thing. I felt that the enemy in this movie wasn't Kang, that it was lazy writing. There was a substantial amount of lazy writing. The very classic, we're just about to go on a 2-hour ride in this vehicle, but there's no time to explain. We can't explain right now because the plot demands that these characters not know what's going on just yet, even though there's every opportunity to tell them, including right in the time that I just said there's no time to explain. You could have just explained it in 2 sentences, so there's that type of stuff going on. I felt that in the comics, when they did sort of this story, and not that I've read all the comics or anything, but, going by the summaries that I've seen other people do, it was in the microverse. Now, there's a whole, litigious thing going on because I think it's Hasbro that owns the microverse trademark because it's part of the Micronauts, and so they had to, retcon around that in the Marvel comics and stuff. But the point being, we've been to the quantum realm before. But when we go to, in the MCU, we've seen the quantum realm before. Ant-Man went there, and then they rescued Janet Van Dyne from there in the second movie. That was, the entire purpose of the whole second movie. And Tom, please remind me, because I'm not remembering absolutely clearly, at the end of at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second movie.
Oh, God. Yeah. Go ahead.
They sent Scott to the quantum realm to, get some particles from there to help out Ghost, right? That was what they were doing. They all knew about it, right? So. That's how he got trapped in the quantum realm, because the snap happened while he was in there. But it's it's not that Janet didn't know he was going there. Wasn't she there behind the machine when they sent him? So
I feel like that's the case. Yes, but I know you're gonna make me go back and rewatch the movie again. That's what
I remember anyway. Somehow now, she's all worried about ever opening a portal to the quantum realm ever again, and that doesn't make any sense, and it's all because of Kang and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the whole thing would have worked a whole lot better if they could have gone to the microverse and not back to the quantum realm, because there was the hand-waviest of hand-wavy explanations for why the quantum realm is completely different in this movie from the 2 previous times that we saw the quantum realm. And so I was like, it really would have helped if this was just a different place that Ant-Man could go that nobody else could get to.
Or just deeper. They could just say that was a deeper level,
that was kind of the hand wavy thing. But anyway, lazy writing in a lot of places. And then the other villain in this movie, I don't want to give anything away. He was in the trailer, so I think it's fine to say, yes, there's another villain. And if you know that other villain, then I don't want to give anything away there. But I just want to say, in this movie, the way that they showed how he was created is maybe one of the most horrifying things I could possibly, and it was really well done. It really tied into the whole Ant-Man mythos of how that character got created and ended up like that. I was like, oh, that's actually the worst thing I've ever heard. It's really gruesome. So I kind of appreciated that. And then so anyway, overall,
there's been lots of images of the person that you're talking about.
Yes.
You should. I mean, he had his own cartoon series.
He had his own cartoon.
On Hulu.
This is a different version, so you'd have to say it's part of the multiverse, and it's not the same. So anyway,
So what do you give it? A 5?
Out of 5? Yeah, a 3.
A 3.
It's a 3. Yeah. Okay. But I'm a little concerned that this is the big introduction to Kang. He's supposed to be the thing that gets us.
He's great in it, though, right? I mean,
the actor
Jonathan
is great,
Majors or whatever his name is.
Yeah, the actor is great. The character, I'm like, this ain't no Thanos. He didn't have the impact that Thanos had, and I know they're going for something different. But I'm a little concerned. We'll see how it all goes.
We'll see. And you guys will get my review once it hits Disney Plus.
That's right. Which won't be all that long.
All right. So I watched a couple of things this week, and I at the end of my COVID whatever, I started watching The Witcher, the series The Witcher. How does that series get renewed? Some of these other series not get renewed.
I mean, at first, Henry Cavill is how it got renewed, and then they're like, bye to him.
But
so
I like him. Right. I do. I like him. I think he's, as far as the things I've seen about him as a person, he seems like a guy I would probably like to hang out with, except for all the working out, which I'm not behind.
And then there were some weird accusations about him too, so I don't know what's going on.
I don't really know.
Zero idea. Never met the guy.
But the gravelly terrible voice with a terrible wig, and I'm just like, why, how? And then the story that you figure out like 4 or 5 episodes in is not chronological. Like there's 2 characters happening at the same time. You know, they keep going between the 2 stories, and you figure out like 4 or 5 episodes in, like, wait, these are not happening at the same time. These are like years apart.
Right,
like, why am I just now figuring? Like, why couldn't you just put like, 10 years ago or something, at the beginning of each one of these things at
because
some
it's
point.
prestige television, Tom, and we don't do that in prestige television.
I'm not through the first series yet, or whatever, the first season yet, and I'm very frustrated with this show.
Okay.
I'm very frustrated with this show. But
well,
whatever.
It's being recast, so in the 3rd season.
Maybe
so
I'll like Liam more
right.
than I like.
Maybe
and
so.
I don't think I will, because I think that the character choices were not entirely made by the actor, but maybe they were. So I did watch a couple movies, though. I watched Top Gun, the original, with my wife and 13-year-old. Is he 13? I can't remember. However old he is, the 8th grader. Watched that, which I think The Maverick was a better movie. Okay. I will say that. I watched this and I'm like, wow, this is slow. Like, this movie just
the nostalgia didn't entirely carry you through.
Didn't carry it through for me. I know some people loved it, but whatever. I also watched from a streaming service, and that had somebody sent a code for this movie, I would not have used it. But had I used it, I would have streamed it this weekend, and it was Ghostbusters Afterlife, which I liked. I thought it was fine. I thought it was slow. I don't necessarily didn't necessarily love every bit of it, but it was a fine movie. It was a fine Ghostbusters movie. All right, it was okay.
I should just mention, as far as Ant-Man Quantumania goes, I do think it'll be a good home theater demo one. There's lots of rumbles going on, and there are at least 2-3 scenes with very obvious overhead sounds. I did see it in an Atmos theater. Very obvious, noticeable overhead sounds moving front to back and around and swirling above you. So they're like, yeah, let's show off Atmos a little bit. It's definitely going to be a demo for that.
Okay. And if you want to hear gravelly voices, you watch The Witcher.
That's right.
That's the whole thing sounds exactly like that. It's like he can't even act. I mean, I know he can act reasonably well, but you can't act and make that voice the entire time. Like you've got no like dynamic range in your voice left. All right, let's get to some podcasting here. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater question. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website where you can find our older episodes, our show notes, and our Flickr albums, so you can follow along with the pictures that we're talking about. You can find us at facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant, where our recording sessions and all their stuttery, weird glory are up there, but they do have the pictures embedded, so you don't have to go through the Flickr album. So there's the upside of that. If you want to do it that way, you can just pause it, look at the picture, and then turn away from the screen as you're doing other things.
So
just listen like a normal podcast. You can contact Rob directly. Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter's at First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. But send your questions to question@avrant.
That is for sure.
I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to become a monthly subscriber, contributor to our podcast. So every month, they'll take some money from you. Patreon.com will, a minimum of $1, and they'll send most of it to us. So we want to thank our 140 patrons over there, 10 away from 150.
Yeah.
140 patrons, including James. So thank you to all our patrons.
Yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So we're at 140 patrons right now. We lost a couple. I don't know where they went. It's the middle of the month, so I don't think it was expiring credit cards. But thank you to the 140 who are still around. And James, thank you for being one of them.
Maybe they're mad at us. Rob,
it could be. We have said some controversial things.
That's right. You don't need an amplifier. Sorry. Let's just get it out of the way now. Answer to all of your amplifier questions are no. You don't need
one. Not literally all, but most.
I mean, so much so that I could start off with a no and then correct myself the few times on this podcast I'd have to correct myself.
Right.
It'd be much easier just to start with a flat no. We got some notes of gratitude from keeping the podcast going during this whatever terrible thing's happening this week. There are quite a few out there, so
take your pick.
Take your pick. That's right. Whichever travesty or global, I don't know, war crime that's happening in your area. I apologize, and I'm sorry that it's. I don't apologize, but I'm sorry and send out my empathy towards you. We got notes of gratitude from Gurinder, Greg, who finds us entertaining and enjoys our two different tones. You want me to be more gravelly? That's a tone. I got. Greg finds us entertaining and enjoys our two different. That is The Witcher the entire time.
Fantastic. You can tell Tom's a fan.
I'm gonna finish the dang thing. That's the problem. Like, I already started, so I'm gonna finish it. There's very few things I've started and not finished. I will tell you that New Amsterdam, which I started watching with my wife, she's just watching it now whenever I'm around and we're not around. Like when I was in the room for COVID, she was watching it by herself. And now that I started with her, she goes, well, I can kind of follow it, so I'm gonna keep watching it, but it's really kind of stupid. I'm like. Like, they do some real dumb things.
Are you in the first season still?
No, she's in the second season now.
Okay. So, yeah, second season, it starts getting kind of dumb. Yeah, that's where I dropped
off.
Well,
there was a couple of times where I was like, wait a second. Yeah, like, they're like, oh, these two people are interested in each other. I'm like, since when? Like, there's been no indication of that, and now suddenly it's a thing. Like, they just literally, one character said to another character, you're really interested in this person. I went... No, she's not.
This is the cast we have. They've all got a couple up at some point.
Oh, whatever. It's very dumb. James, who's a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club, always listens to the entire episode, but he thinks the What We Watch section is getting too long even for him. Don't care. Sorry, James.
I mean, it vacillates greatly depending on
today
what we
was
watched.
Much shorter.
Today was much shorter.
Yeah. But I watched less.
That's what happens. Yeah, it all depends on what we actually watched and how we felt about it. It'll be the size it ends up being because we don't script that part out at all.
I don't script anything. I hate to break it to you. I just read these questions and then whatever we talk about, we talk about. Brian Eddie is so in the that's not actually audible camp regarding the worries about MTM or Diapolito center speakers when you're off axis. So he agrees with us. Good job. He's not one of the people that.
Look at the lobes, Tom. Look at the lobes in the ground.
Jorge, who said, who wrote our podcast outro music? What about our intro music? Were they written together? He remembers our intro music changed at one point, but he can't recall if the outro music was ever different. What went into the decisions for what we use? Ted, right? Ted did both of those.
Did Ted do both? Intro and outro?
So.
He definitely did the outro music, yeah.
I think he did the intro music first, and then he also did the outro
intro music
later.
That you changed to, because he didn't do the original intro music.
The original
was way back.
Was from some
like a
song I found online. Yeah, it wasn't royalty free.
Oh, okay.
It was from some rapper, some online rapper guy that I found, and I contacted him and said, "Can I use it?" He goes, "I don't care. I just sampled it anyways." I'm like, "Okay, well, it's on from your song, and you said I could use it, so I'm going to use it." And that's how that worked. And that was the same for.
Didn't you have different outro music back then? Wasn't it like? Didn't you just use two separate sections of the original song?
Of the same song, yeah.
I don't recall clearly anymore.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And then Ted offered, I believe, new intro music, which we use. And then later on, he was like, "Dude, would you also like outro music?" And I said, "Well, yeah, because it's probably gonna. Once we get huge, any day now, somebody's gonna want to
hang on for another 15 years." Yeah. Speaking of people who got ticked off because we said not to buy an amplifier, because we haven't heard from Ted ever since we said that his whole thing about hearing a difference in the amplifier, that his Class D amplifier there got. We've never heard from him again.
I still see him. I'm Facebook friends with him. I still see him posting stuff. He's a very busy man, and his kids are getting older, and that you would be surprised.
But I attribute it to telling him that he didn't really hear the difference he thought he heard in his Class D amplifier, and he never came back.
That's all right. We still love you, Ted. Don't listen to Rob.
Definitely.
He's a Canadian hater. Underneath that thin shell of saying I'm sorry for everything is seething rage.
I am highly passive aggressive.
There is so much aggressive underneath all that passive. There's a lot.
Yup. It's true. I will say the names of the people who sent in the notes of gratitude.
I've got under good authority that the entire Canadian nation is this way. In case you're wondering, They're all that way.
I mean,
and
watch us play hockey.
Yeah, really.
Get bubbles
Why
to
do
the
you think those
surface.
hockey games are so cathartic for that country?
Right.
They're like, more violence, please. I need to feel something. I mean, to release my rage.
You hear about the stereotype of Japanese people being so polite and reserved, and then you see them go absolutely nuts when they go out to karaoke. So that's very similar to
it's a
to
very
Canadians.
similar experience. That's right.
Yes. So
they also like baseball, which if that doesn't make you angry, like watching baseball induces rage in me. Like just having to sit there and watch baseball. All you people who love baseball, if you want to send your hate at me, it's Lee at AVRant.com.
Right, that's right.
Send it to that.
That's a real address. It'll work.
That's a real address. It will not bounce.
It won't
just
bounce.
Tell me how much you hate me. Don't mention me by name. just send hate mail.
Lee at AVRant.com. Totally.
Lee at AVRant. That's my
totally
that's my complaint line.
So the names that I've been trying to
news.
say. Hold on, I haven't said the names because I didn't get to say them. Gurinder, Greg, James, Brian, Eddie, Jorge, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude. The notes of encouragement are appreciated. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news, KEF has released a new R series of speakers. I think we covered that on AV Gadgets, did we not?
I don't know.
I think we did.
I'll change the link.
But no surprise, it's their R series. We definitely did. The R series Meta. Honestly, dude, I'm so over the Meta thing. I cannot tell you how little I think this actually matters in the sounds of these speakers. It's like you might as well just put V2 after it and said we made the bracing better in there, but whatever. So they're borrowing the metamaterial absorption technology from their LS series to reduce back wave sounds from behind the drivers inside the speaker cabinets. They're up there to their 12th generation of UniQ R series concentric mid-range and tweeter. All models use the same 5-inch mid-range with a 1-inch tweeter. All of the drivers are aluminum and they're all rated at 4 ohm nominal impedance. The lineup consists of 3 towers, a bookshelf model, 2 centers, and a wedge-shaped model that can be either wall-mounted or used as an upward-firing Atmos module, because who really cares anymore? At this point, they're just like, put it whatever you want.
I didn't notice any sort of switch to, like, employ some sort of crossover change or frequency response slope for the upward firing versus the on-wall, so I don't think they're caring about that.
I just don't think they care. I don't think they should. So all the models are available in gloss white, gloss black, or walnut. And in about 6 months, they're going to release a big press release that they're going to expect me to cover on AV Gadgets. That's going to talk about their new colors that they have coming out that I'm not going to care about.
I mean, they've got a couple of specials for a couple of the models, but only a couple of models.
The ported models include optional port plugs in the box, and lo and behold, KEF is introducing magnetic grills in the boxes too, going from least expensive to most expensive. We got the R8 Meta Surround, the Atmos module thingy, for $800 each.
No, that's right. Yeah, $800 each. $1,600 a pair. Sorry, that was the price I was looking at. But yeah, $800 each.
R3 Meta 3-way bookshelf is $1,100 each. The R2 Meta Center with 5.25 inch woofers, $1,400 each. The R6 Meta Center 6.5 woofers for $2,000 each. The Meta Tower R5, the 5.25 woofers are $2,000 each. The R7, because they already have an R8.
Yeah, that's right.
Meta towers are with 6.5 inch woofers are $2,500 each, and the R11 Meta tower with 4 6.5 inch woofers are $3,250 each. So run out there and buy them. Whatever. That's what's going on there.
I've always liked the R series. I've no reason to think that this R series won't also sound great. I mean, I'm quite confident the next iteration of the Q series is going to have metamaterial back absorbers. It's
going to be a shock when it happens. We're all going to be so surprised.
Seems quite predictable as far as that goes. So that's KEF's new thing. They're going to have meta at the end of the name of all of that stuff, and we'll see if Mark Zuckerberg decides to sue them at some point.
Yeah. According to The Verge, Sonos will be releasing 2 new smart speakers, the $250 Era 100 and the $450 Era 300 this March. They're going for very rounded designs, and they're adding Bluetooth input and USB-C audio input while seemingly removing Google Assistant as an option for built-in voice control. Amazon's voice assistant is still built in along with Sonos' own voice control. The Era 100 is basically the new replacement for the Sonos One, but the Era 300 has a new trick since it has an upward-firing driver to support spatial audio and Dolby Atmos. Just one driver?
You can use them as a pair, but the single speaker just has one.
Okay. However, it seems as though Amazon is the only Atmos music service willing to play with them. Apple's Atmos music library reportedly won't be supported, and no word yet on Tidal. The bigger news for home theater fans is that a pair of Era 300 speakers can be used as wireless surrounds, along with a Sonos Arc or Beam Gen 2 soundbar. To finally deliver 4 overhead channels instead of just 2, the soundbar will handle generating the top front sounds, while a pair of Era 300 surrounds will use their upward-firing drivers for top rear surrounds. I thought this was a soundbar. That's why I was confused by the single driver. And in this sort of home theater configuration, you could plug an Apple TV 4K into your TV and use a Sonos soundbar's eARC port to play Dolby Atmos music from Apple Music. So that's the expensive workaround if you want to do it that way. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so not quite clear if this is completely replacing the lineup of Sonos smart speakers, but it basically seems like it is. The price point on that Era 300 is actually a little bit lower than the Sonos 5. Is that what the thing is called? The biggest one that they have? But yeah, previously they didn't have Bluetooth input on their home speakers. They only started that with their portable speakers, but now they're like, oh, apparently that's popular and people want to do it, so they're going to put it into the home speakers as well, and they're embroiled in a legal battle with Google, so that's why it seems the Google Assistant might not be there out of the box built into the thing as it used to be.
Oh, I thought they just OEM'd it to their own one. So we've been waiting on prices for Samsung's second generation QD-OLED models, and now we have them, at least in Europe. Here in North America, only the 77-inch S95C flagship has launched for $4,500. We're still waiting on the 55-inch and 65-inch sizes, as well as less expensive S90C series entirely. But European prices, in euros of course, for all Samsung QD-OLED models have been announced now, and here they are. The S95C, 2,500 euros. I guess these are for the different sizes, right? 55, 65, and 75. Is that what it is?
That's right.
Is it 75 or 77?
77, yeah. So 55, 65, and 77 inch.
So 2,500, 3,300, and 4,800 euros. And then the S90C is 2,000, 28, and 4,000 euros. And I think euros are they pretty equivalent to the dollar right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close to 1-to-1. Well, I mean, we've got $4,500 US for the 77-inch size, and now that same model in Europe is 4,800 euros. So, but I don't know if they're including, VAT in that, because a lot of places have that as part of the price. So, I mean, I'm thinking that maybe you take 200-300 euro off of that, and you get something pretty darn close in the S95C range. So, thinking the 65-inch S95C might be $3,000 US. That seems fairly reasonable. That, I think, the price that the S95B came out at last year, so I don't think there's much changing there. And then I'm guessing that the S90C, like the 65-inch, is probably going to be 2,500 or 2,600 instead of 2,800 euros. So yeah, given a ballpark figure there, nothing exactly surprising, but it is bringing those S90C prices, undercutting some of the LG OLED models. So bringing some competition there for sure.
Yeah. Comments. Larry just wanted to share that he switched from Paradigm Monitor SE series speakers to Q Acoustics 3020 and 3010 speakers that he found on sale. He's using them in his small 10.5 by 11.5 foot theater, powered by a Denon X4500H receiver. He's very happy with the change and thinks they sound way better. Oh, there you go.
So happy that you're happy. My experience with Q Acoustics is that they're pretty reminiscent of B&W's sound, Bowers and Wilkins sound. Both do have British heritage, and I think they go for a little bit of that BBC type of sound.
Right.
So what is so commonly referred to as warmth? Oh my goodness, how people love warmth in their frequency response sound, which basically just means a little bit of enhanced lower mid-range, enhanced upper bass, and a fairly noticeable high frequency roll-off quite often. So yeah, the Q Acoustics to my ear have been pretty darn similar to B&W, but at a lower price point, which makes them quite popular. So you are not alone in loving that sound. There are many, many, many B&W speaker fans out there.
I think that
liking that sound is not a surprise.
Speakers that sound like this tend to be preferred by people who don't want to treat their rooms.
There's a bit of that, and there's also like it does tend to make music recordings, even ones that aren't necessarily the greatest technical on a technical level music recordings, it smooths out a bit of what might sound a little bit harsh or might not sound particularly full. So it sort of enhances those things and tends to make a lot of recordings just sound more pleasing. Might not be ruler technically accurate.
Right.
But if your goal is to enjoy all the music you listen to, as opposed to just know on an analytical level that you're hearing exactly what was recorded, even though you might not prefer it, then yeah, that's why they're very popular speakers.
Well, and I just want to address this for just a second. And there comes a time when, we as podcasters and, AV professionals, if you want to call us that, there's certain things that we like and we prefer, and that doesn't necessarily make them the best for everybody. And there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of people who think this has been the best for me, therefore it must be the best for everybody. And this is a perfect example of that. Like, I would not prefer that sound. I would prefer what I have, which is pretty much describes everybody listening to this podcast. They prefer what they have because that's what they have.
That way.
Yeah. But on top of that, it's okay to not have, that ruler accurate sound that you and I are looking for, because we want to know if there's a problem with the system, if there's a problem with what we're seing or hearing, that it's not the system that's creating the problem, it's the content. And then you're just like, okay, well, this content's not very good. I should prefer, go to something else. Other people are like, I really like to listen to this album, and I listen to it in my car, and it's great, and I put it in my home theater with my ruler flat speakers, and I go, wow, this sounds like absolute garbage. But if I switch my speakers, suddenly I'm like, I'm enjoying my music again. I don't see how I can tell that person, yeah, but you need to stick with the speakers that sound like crap to you. There's no real way of doing that, I think, ethically. Like, I should just say, that's the music. There are people who have not stopped listening to the same albums since high school.
Sure.
They listen to the same stuff, and they don't want it to be any more accurate. They want it to sound good.
Yeah, they want to sound like the way they remember it. Yeah, I mean, I know on a personal level, like, I enjoy the way Golden Ear speakers sound, and I've seen the measurements. I know they don't measure absolutely really flat. They tune them. They have a coloration to the sound. I find it very pleasing, though. So, that's a perfect example of I might know something on paper, doesn't mean I can't still enjoy something.
Right. Ian says he can't help but cringe a bit whenever we talk about speakers and amplifiers and use a phrase such as speaker requesting power or speaker drawing power from the amplifier. He's got a degree in physics, so the incorrect analogy bothers him every time. There's got to be a better way to phrase it. He understands that we're trying to simplify, but he hopes that we can adjust our language to be closer to correct. When you turn up the volume dial, you increase the electrical potential, the voltage, of the signal within the circuit. The impedance load is the speaker, so for any given frequency, the impedance stays the same. So if the voltage goes up, the amplifier has to deliver an increase in amperage to match. Nothing is being pushed, nothing is being pulled. It's just an electrical potential. It's Ohm's law, at least in its simple terms. I hate to break it to you, but what you just described is being pulled. And I know that it's not technically correct, but I know that's not technically, but it is, as far as everybody who's listening. Listen, we're going from people who are who think that amplifiers push all 100 watts constantly to their speakers.
Yeah,
and we're trying to.
Yeah,
we're
really
trying
comes
to,
from that.
Yeah, we're trying to go from the other side.
Overcorrection. Yeah, it's absolutely an overcorrection to refer to something like an amplifier and speaker circuit to refer to power being drawn or requested. Like that. You're right. Yeah, like, first of all, you're right. And
we're not saying he's wrong. But what I'm saying is, like, it's what we're saying is, like, the hill is drawing the rock down it. And you're saying, no, it's not. It's just the difference in, elevation, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, but I can't say that in a sentence or really quickly. So I know you're right.
Yeah.
But that's essentially what's happening here. It's like, by turning up the volume dial, you're asking... you're creating an imbalance that has to be corrected, and it's corrected via the amp putting out more power towards, or voltage or whatever, towards the speaker. And I have to kind of describe what's happening here in the simplest terms, because people are not thinking that that's what's happening. Like somehow they think
Yeah,
all 100 watts are going there all the time, and then when you change the volume, it just uses more of them or something. I don't really know how they think.
The major thing is trying to get away from the idea of power being pushed into speakers. That you have a speaker that's got its rating on its spec sheet of recommended power for this speaker 25 to 150 watts. If I connect it to an amplifier that says it can deliver 300 watts, it's gonna blow up the speaker because all that power is gonna get shoved into it, whether it wants it or not. Like that is the major thing we're trying to get away from. But then saying the power is drawn is an overcorrection, also incorrect in the opposite way. So Ian is not the first person to talk about this. Actually, the last time we really talked about it in depth, it was one of the episodes Tom was away, and I did so with Lee. So I have, since that time, tried to interject a little bit every time that phrasing gets used to say, well, it is this difference in potential, and that is what is causing the electricity to flow back and forth. It's the alternating current in a speaker. That's how you get the back and forth movement going on. So, I mean, I think maybe if you're still someone who doesn't want to deal with any of the math or the electronics or the science of it, but you just want an analogy that you can picture. I mean, one that works reasonably well, and Ian, please correct me if I'm completely off on this as well, but one that works a little bit closer is, imagine you've got kind of like a long tray, like with some sides on it, and that whole tray has water in it, and then you've got a little wheel in the middle of that tray, and so you can kind of tilt up the right side, and then you can tilt up the left side, and you know that the water is kind of going to slosh back and forth. And if you raised one side higher and then you raised the other side higher than the last time that you did it back and forth, well, that's like increasing the voltage. That's increasing the difference in potential from the raised side to the bottom side, and we know the water is going to flow down, and we know that it's going to flow down with greater force if you raise it even higher on one side than the last time that we raised it. That wheel in the middle has some friction to it. So that's like the impedance of the speaker. It resists the flow of that water as it goes back and forth, whatever friction there is on the wheel. So if we have a lower impedance, a lower friction wheel, that's like a 4 ohm speaker instead of an 8 ohm speaker that resists it more. Higher impedance would resist moving with that water flowing. So then we think, okay, we increase the force that the water is coming down. If we have, very low impedance, well then literally more water is going to be able to get through it. Right? That's the amperage. The amperage is the actual amount of electrons, the amount of water. So that is just Ohm's law, right? If we've kept the impedance the same, but we increase the voltage, then more amperage is going to go through that circuit. So you can kind of picture that. And Ian, please tell me if that analogy is still terrible. I don't think it is. But yeah, that's why it's not that water's being pushed through the wheel. It's not that it's being sucked through the wheel. It's that you're tilting the slope that the water is on, and it just wants to flow down. So there you go.
The more important point is that you're not getting 100 watts all the time to everything.
It is definitely not just shoving it through. No.
Yeah, that's the important part. I understand what Ian's saying. I'm obviously not going to disagree with somebody. But I think the analogy that we generally use, or we have been using, and I still use, is more accurate than not, and it still conveys. It's
just better than saying it's pushed.
Yeah,
That's all
it still
it is.
conveys sort of the right thought here. Versus like I said, the gravity thing is the same thing
right.
as what you were saying. It's just changing the slope. Questions, Julian. Not to get too heavy or personal, but Julian wanted to share how thankful he is for us providing a mental distraction during some very stressful times for him and his family. Recently, Julian and his wife just had a baby girl. Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
But she was born premature, and there were additional complications following her birth. His wife and daughter were transported by plane to a larger hospital, but Julian had to drive, and it was all happening just as there were freeway closures because, of course, there were.
Yeah, that is how life goes.
Needless to say, this all had him in a very fragile mental state, but our podcast helped him as he drove, and he wants to give a huge shout out to the Ronald McDonald House, where they will likely be staying for several more weeks through March. Happily, their daughter has started to gain some weight, and everybody is receiving much needed care. So, on a much lighter note, he's got some questions here.
Yes.
I just want to say, Julian, you're welcome. This is also true of, as a society, we went through something pretty traumatic a couple of years ago.
Sure
I don't
did.
know if you guys remember. And there have been times when I have been at my best, and I think I've helped people, and there have been times I've been at my worst, and I think I haven't, and I know I haven't. So it's good to remember that all of us have an impact on the lives of people around us, even in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine. If you ask me if somebody in Julian's situation would find my podcast helpful, I would have said no.
Doesn't have anything to do with his situation.
I mean, I was just like, I
needs.
would be the last thing I would want to listen to if I was in that situation. I would listen to, I don't know, thrash metal or something to help me scream on the, through that traffic, so it didn't seem like I was cursing at all the people around me. So I'm glad that we could be there for you, and I want everybody who's listening to this podcast and to remember that every moment of every day, no matter what you're doing, there is a chance that you could be affecting the people around you for the better or the worse. And you're not always going to be doing the former, and you're not always going to be doing the latter, but you can strive for that former as much as possible. So Julian says, Audiolux has been covering the new flagship Denon A1H receiver recently, and Gene has made several comparisons to the old 5805 model that he loved so much. Julian decided to see if any 5805 units were still for sale, and he found one listed in good condition for a mere $800. It was $6,000 back in 2005. Obviously, on the video side of things, it can't handle the newest HDMI signals and formats, but but in terms of its analog inputs and its preamp section and its built-in amplifiers, it would still be a great piece of equipment, wouldn't it?
It sure would.
That be? I mean, yeah. People are using it still right this second.
Yes.
So would there be any reason to steer clear of it for, say, a 2-channel setup, or using it just as an amplifier, or maybe powering a full non-Atmos system? Just because it doesn't have the latest HDMI doesn't make it useless, does it? I could use it.
I mean, the only thing I will say is it is a behemoth. It is monster. It is bigger than ATI's amplifiers, which is really saying something. So from a convenience standpoint, I don't think it's going to win any marks. But for $800, because this was a 10-channel amplifier built into it and performed like a full separate amplifier. Like when you're talking all channels driven, this thing was doing the 150 watts all channels driven like a much more expensive separate amplifier might do. So yeah, I mean, it has a full 7.1 set of pre-ins on the back, analog pre-ins, which wouldn't quite let you use all 10 built-in amplifiers, although you could bi-amplify the front three channels and still have enough amplifiers left over to single drive the remaining in a 7-speaker setup. And it does have HDMI inputs that are fully capable of everything prior to Atmos. So yeah, if you don't have an Atmos setup, you could still send HDMI audio into this thing and have Dolby True HD and DTS HD Master Audio. There's no slouch there. So absolutely, there's still use for this thing. At $800, it's an absolute steal. Just be aware, it's gigantic.
Right, and there's just so many setups, so many people that I think don't need or shouldn't have installed an Atmos speaker configuration in their home theaters that could have benefited from. I mean, if you think about what this thing can do, it can do just about everything you need it to do as long as you're not doing Atmos. And there's lots of ways to get around, the gaming portion of it that we've talked about numerous times on this podcast. So yeah, I think that there's still some use for it. Now, how much longer? At least another couple of years. I would think.
Well, I mean, as an amplifier, at the very least, a 7-channel amplifier.
Yeah.
Like a 7-channel amplifier for $800. There's 7-channel models from Emotiva or Outlaw Audio that are very close in price to that, but not actually as powerful as this thing. So there you go. It fully justifies its price just for that. It's a much bigger.
Secondly, he asked, what are our thoughts on the disposable nature of the home theater hobby? E-waste is a real problem, and it seems like manufacturers could do a lot better to extend the lifespan of products if there were proper incentives for them to do so. AV receivers in particular seem wasteful when a single new format or just a change of the HDMI spec has us buying an entirely new unit. Would it really be that hard to make them upgradable, since amplifiers and preamp sections all still work perfectly fine.
You ain't wrong.
I mean, what you're saying isn't incorrect. It's just not that's just not how AV receivers work. You could say make the same. There's a lot of things that we own that could and is possible for us to upgrade them and keep them current without replacing entirely.
Computers and phones, right? I mean, it's just, you'd think. I mean, computers, it used to be easy, but it's increasingly
you can't even replace a battery
less
in your phone anymore,
right?
right?
Exactly.
I mean, the last phone I had that could replace a battery was like the Galaxy Nexus from back in God knows when.
And it's like, did you really need to replace the entire screen? Did you need to replace the cell radio, inside of there? Did you need to replace the Wi-Fi chips? Like, there's oodles of stuff that, you could reuse. It would still function perfectly fine, but the design of the thing just isn't, it's not.
I think the recycling aspect of it is what's, like, I have a stack of electronics that are sitting in my bedroom, just to the left of my dresser, that's kind of off in the corner there, and I just stack them up there, and I'm just waiting for some way to get rid of these things. I got old computers, I've got, just devices that I don't use anymore, and some of them, if they still work, I'll give them to one of the, Salvation Army, Goodwill, one of those places, and let them, make some money off of them.
Right.
At least then, I know that they're being recycled in a way. But yeah, if it was easier for me to just donate or get rid of these things in a way that I was like, okay, they're going to be recycled, or they're not going to just go to some pawn shop where somebody's going to try to pick them up and, find all my data or whatever on there, especially old computers. Because I never feel like you can really get rid of all the data that's on that hard disk. So, what am I supposed to do? Take the computer apart, try to get the hard drive out, and why do they say hard disk?
I don't know. I mean, it's not entirely wrong. But I mean, like the AV receiver thing, there have been attempts to sell upgradable AV receivers. NAD has done that multiple times.
They got mad at me. They get mad at me every time they release it, and I say it's not going to work, and it doesn't. They're like, oh, we've been supporting our last one for... Yeah, it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Emotiva is lightly saying that the AV receiver they just released is, upgradable. And the Emotiva fans came out on the YouTube video where we talked about that, and they're like, they said they're going to upgrade it. I'm like, yeah, just keep holding your breath. That's going to be a fantastic wait for that to happen. But I mean, like, over and over, we've just seen that it largely doesn't happen. Maybe they release like one upgrade board of something just so they don't get a class action lawsuit from the people who bought it, so they can claim, yep, see, we released an upgrade for this thing. But it seems to be like, when they're trying to upgrade, say, the decoding, right? You had an AV receiver that never did Dolby Atmos originally. You're saying, is it like, I could still use the 7 amplifiers in here. I could do a 5.1.2 system. Can't I upgrade the decoding circuitry that's in here? But it's like, well, then you're also upgrading the processor that's inside there. Yeah. And then you're upgrading, maybe the DACs need to be, changed or upgraded or something like that. Like, it's just this sort of,
it's
snowball
not as simple.
effect.
Yeah, it's not as simple. Like, you can swap out boards to a certain extent, but at some point you just reach the limit of either the space or the like Rob said, the processor or other components that are in there that are not swappable. There is no way of just swapping out the whole thing. If
everything were built in there as more like individual components, more like a home built PC, that type of thing. I mean, I think that's what he's going for, right? He's like, can we change that? Because what happens when you print, one entire circuit board that has all of these different facets on there, then you have to replace the whole darn thing. You can't just replace a portion of it, at least not easily. So, could we design these things so that, well, yeah, they are, in individual little pieces that you could replace, but then you eventually run into like, well, there has to be some sort of bus to transport the data between these different boards, and you end up reaching the bandwidth limits of that bus because it's never enough. Like these upgradable laptops that are coming out now, I'm like, they've got these little modules so you can change your input and output on there. I'm like, but eventually you're going to have input outputs that need more bandwidth than the little module connector can handle, and then you're replacing the entire laptop again. Like, it seems to happen over and over and over again. So in terms of just economies of scale and manufacturing these things as simply and quickly as possible, they end up with the single circuit design, and that seems to be the issue behind it. So I agree with you. There is definitely more that could be done. Are we essentially, I think the price would go up if we did it this way. That's what would happen. And are we willing to pay that? And vastly, the answer historically has always been no. People are not willing to pay more for something that they could actually upgrade. They will always go for the thing that costs less today.
That's right. Dan is pleased that we've been willing to discuss his questions about what genuinely makes one piece of equipment sound different from another, but I heard it phenomenon and all that. He's a musician, and he also composes music, and he got into audio gear and home theater with more of an art mindset versus science or tech mindset. For example, back in the 80s and early 90s, he got into all that cable hoopla. Being amongst the audiophile community and reading audio magazines, the idea of purchasing oodles of different, often expensive cables just to find just the right sound started to feel totally natural. It was like the little adjustments you make as a musician to make improvements and to evolve your technique over time. He credits Audioholics with getting him to question what all these high-end cables were really doing, though, and Tom's phrase of, "There's nothing a cable can do to make the sound better. The only thing it can do is make it sound worse," struck a chord with him, and it makes perfect sense when you think about it. The problem with audiophiles is they don't think about it. They never think about it. All right? Logic has nothing to do with this. He's on board with cables just doing their job, and if you want them to look pretty, that's jewelry, and it's perfectly fine to want jewelry sometimes. But he's still coming from his audiophile roots, and so he has some more questions when it comes to AV receivers and noticing differences between different brands and models. Recently, he picked up a used an X3100W and manually set it up, no odyssey, to compare it with his Sony 5000 ES, also manually set up. Since neither receiver was applying any room correction and he manually set their distance and trim levels and crossovers, he figured that should come closer to there really aren't any audible differences between receivers claim. He says that he has his own way of setting up dual subwoofers, not as tedious as Rob's 12-step guide, and he just wants straight decoding, no upmixing being applied. So, for 2-channel music listening, he does still have the subwoofers active and his front speaker set to small, just the basic stereo listening modes on both receivers, and he would agree they sound pretty close. Certainly no night and day difference. Maybe on some songs he'd say one sounded a bit better than the other, but no way to say one receiver was better or worse. But then he played some games with his Xbox One X. He relies on very directional sounds in competitive shooters, and with his Sony receiver he could tell exactly where what else was behind him just from the footsteps or other sound effects. In terms of UI, it was easy to go on his computer with the Sony and use that interface to set each input to the audio format decoding mode so that he would always just get straight decoding. On the Denon he couldn't find a similar setting or the same easy computer interface. He wound up using the multi-channel in listening mode, which seemed like the closest option, and things like those footsteps behind him sounded more vague, leading him to turn the wrong way sometimes. Pressing game or movie on the Denon remote just seemed to lead to a bunch of DSP modes that reminded him of Yamaha's Madness. It's not the same as Yamaha's Madness.
No, it's not as extensive as that.
So this kind of difference, ease of use, placement of surround effects, choosing listening modes, is there a simple way to make the Denon sound the same as the Sony's? Is he just setting the Denon wrong and it'll all sound the same once he sets it right? Or was his Sony wrong all along, even though it sure seemed like those game sounds were having game effects having pinpoint accuracy in terms of placement can't possibly be wrong. So there is something to be said about ease of use, and there's also something to be said about familiarity. You know, it sounds like you're much more familiar with how to control a Sony than you are a Denon, which is perfectly
totally fair if that's what you've had for several years, and then you switch to a new brand with a new GUI. Absolutely.
Try to watch me go through a Yamaha receivers menu and see how painful that is, because I haven't seen a Yamaha menu in at least a decade.
Tom should go through an Anthem, because that'd be a fun experience for a few hours there.
So there is and unfortunately, and I have an article planned to write about this, about is older gear better than newer gear? And one of the things that I feel like people are attributing the betterness of older gear is that it's just simpler. Like, new gear is like much harder to set up the way you want, because there's many more settings. They're trying to cover
so many things. They're trying to do so many things, and then also like, this is definitely a criticism I have of Denon and Marantz, which is that one of the things they don't want to do is remove a setting that used to exist in a current receiver where you don't really need it anymore, and you end up with 4 different ways of applying dynamic range
compression. Get rid
compression.
of the LFP for LFE setting, please. Like, does that really need to be there? Because I keep getting people on AV Gadgets saying it makes a difference, and I'm like, it can't. You know, like,
well, if you set it really low, you're losing a bunch of bass. But I mean, yeah, like,
they're like, they said it's a 250 and it sounds way better.
Oh,
I'm like, no, it doesn't. It sounds exactly the same. This is literally psychology. This is all that's going on here.
But yeah, that is certainly a criticism I have of them, and a criticism I have of them that would apply to the model that you got, going all the way back to the X3100W. This is something they have not changed until literally this year with the 2023 models that just came out. They do have an auto listening mode. You access it by pressing the pure listening mode button. There's movie, music, game, and pure. And there is an auto listening mode within that pure listening mode button that goes to direct and then pure direct and then auto. But the way that Denon and Marantz have always used that auto mode in the past until literally this year's models is they would apply upmixing to everything. They wouldn't just do straight decoding, which is what you want, and which is what your Sony does in its auto format decoding mode. Right. The Denon and Marantz, including the X3100W that you got, they always applied upmixing, and back then it would have been Dolby Pro Logic 2X that got applied to everything, and that does, you know, spread some of the sounds out, particularly in the surround channels. So if you were just using the auto mode and the Denon, he didn't mention that, but if you did use that, it doesn't do exactly the same thing as the Sony. Now, that isn't the decoder is different, or the amplifiers sound way different, or the preamplifier section sounds way different. That is literally, the signal is being manipulated by an upmixer in that scenario, and absolutely could explain the difference in sound. When you say you were using multi-channel in, that would mean you had to have set your Xbox One X to uncompressed 5.1 or 7.1 output, which means you're relying on the Xbox doing all of the decoding and channel steering, which it does wrong because it puts the surround channels into the surround back speakers, which might explain some of the, hey, that sound didn't come from exactly where I thought it did. Yeah. Because the Xbox does it wrong. So that
I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about the Xbox's audio, but I am not a fan. I don't know if anybody on this podcast has ever heard me. Maybe I haven't said that out loud. Rob, have I ever talked about the Xbox audio?
It's come up a time or two, although maybe not maybe just enough.
Maybe our personal conversations and not on the podcast. Yeah,
right.
Not a fan. The Xbox sucks when it comes to audio. Does like anything you can do wrong, the Xbox does wrong.
Right.
Almost seemingly on purpose.
And then another thing, in Denon and Marantz, going back to the X3100W days, there actually were differences between the movie, music, and game mode buttons. There aren't anymore. We really don't need those buttons on the current Denon and Marantz remotes because they don't make any difference anymore, but there used to be a difference. It really was in the upmixing where they made a difference, but back in the Dolby Pro Logic 2X days and the DTS Neo X days, there were differences between the movie, music, and game mode buttons. That's why they existed in the first place, because there were differences. So in a case like this where you want the most pinpoint placement of sounds, you would actually want to use that game listening mode button because it did the most discrete decoding. Now, if you don't want to apply an upmixer, it is a matter of pressing the button repeatedly and scrolling through all the options. And you're right, there are some DSP options in there like rock and hall and jazz and stuff. They existed. Not as many as Yamaha, but they were in there.
Why are those even still a thing?
But the thing you want to do to get back to what your Sony used to do with your Denon. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Why is it this long of an explanation? But what you would want to do is set your Xbox One X to output a bit stream. You'd want it to output Dolby Digital or DTS, like just output the bit stream. And then you would press that game mode button until the front panel just says Dolby Digital. Nothing else. No Dolby Digital plus something else or one of the DSP modes. That's going to do the most accurate decoding without the Xbox messing up some of the decoding. So that's how to get them to sound the same. The auto format decoding in your Sony receiver used to be doing that. And once you do that, I would suspect is going to be similar to your 2-channel experience, where both of them were just in stereo listening mode, where you can't really tell them apart. In a blind experiment, you wouldn't be able to tell which was which.
Yeah. So he heard a demo of an Integra DTR 60.6 receiver powering triad speakers, and it seemed to have this effortless punch and greater dynamics than the setup with his Sony receiver at home. And it seemed like the used Denon he was trying was even a step behind the Sony. Since he's looking for a new receiver to buy, is this feeling of effortless dynamics in an area where Integra has a leg up? Nope. It's...
So, I mean, first of all, triad speakers. Yeah. Triad speakers, which are known to be often quite bright and high efficiency. Not the highest efficiency of any speaker out there, but higher than quite a few others. The likelihood, when you were listening to that demo, is that you probably were hearing it at a higher volume than you might suspect, because people tend to think that if you had turned up the volume that you're gonna notice everything sounds louder. No, we still have the dynamic range of whatever the original signal was. Quiet things are still quiet. It's quiet things don't get way louder when you turn them up. They're still quiet. It's just that when you have the volume dial turned up to reference volume versus where you probably listen to it at home, then when those dynamic moments hit, well, they are that much louder. Whereas before you weren't getting that full range between the quietest moments and the loudest. So when you're there's a little bit, I'm inferring a little bit here, but he has mentioned this idea of just naming a brand, right? Sony, Integra, Denon, and does it have this sort of sound, which is a very common thing in audiophile circles. You're certainly not alone. But that is perhaps one of the most obvious cases to me of misattribution, right? Where you're attributing whatever difference it is that you're perceiving to an overgeneralization, right? I compared these two AV receivers. I heard a difference. That means Denons sound this way and Yamahas sound this way. Sony's sound this way and Integra's sound this way. And that is a vast overgeneralization attributing the entire difference to a brand. That is just incorrect.
Let's take this a real maybe a step back and use a metaphor that maybe makes a little bit more sense. So you have a car that you've driven, and you go to a lot, and you drive a brand new car you've never seen before on a road you've never been on before, and you say, and you get done, you go, "Wow, I wonder if these tires, those tires made a huge difference. I'm going to put them on my car."
Right.
There's so many things that changed between the first experience you had and the second experience. Yeah. And yet you're attributing all that change to the tires. Yeah. Instead of all the hundreds of other things that could have made the difference. So what could have made the difference here? I mean, were you listening to the same content? You weren't in the same room. You weren't using the same speakers.
Different room, different speakers.
You don't even know how everything was set up or calibrated. There's, I assume that you know what listening mode you were listening to, but how was was there any EQ applied? Were there room treatments going on?
Was there some dynamic range compression applied? Because it's amazing how applying a little bit of dynamic range compression actually makes you think everything sounds louder. Yeah. There's
a lot that can be going on here, and you're going, variables. Well, that receiver sounds a lot different. Right. I mean, what?
Boiling it all down to the brand, right?
Yeah,
that's just
and then saying, and not only that, extrapolating to all of the receivers from that manufacturer and saying they must all sound this way. It's just misattribution at its finest. There is no way there's no way you can know what changed. Whenever you're trying to compare two things, the most important thing you can do is only make one change at a time.
And in the case of AV receivers, that is tremendously difficult because
very difficult.
Replacing an Integra with a Denon, that is not changing one variable. You changed one piece of equipment. I agree with you there, but it is not changing only one variable, and therefore we can attribute any difference to the brand. That is just false. That wouldn't be scientifically rigorous.
When we talk about these things, we talk about AV receivers. We're like, they should sound all the same, because we can take a measurement of the amplifier section.
Right.
And we can see what comes in, we can see what comes out, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly the same as what came in and came out on the other one. So that part is identical. And then you look at the HDMI and the decoding and the decoders that they're using, that part should all be identical. But there's so many other little things that go on there, and there are
many filters that can be applied to the signal before it ultimately comes out. And to be absolutely sure that we haven't actually applied some filters in one and not the other, or have applied exactly the same filters in both, it takes a remarkable amount of rigor and tedium to actually boil down and make sure that we're only doing one thing. So it's a big challenge, and it's basically what audiophilia thrives on.
Well, it's the misattribution. They thrive on the fact that people will hear something if you tell them to hear it, and that people will misattribute changes that they hear to whatever you tell them is the thing that made that change. These
are the things we're comparing. Don't pay attention to all the other variables that also changed.
Right. So Onkyo versus Integra, is it just that Onkyo is aimed at general consumers and Integra is aimed at installers, but performance-wise, they're actually the same? He's considering the Integra DRX 5.4, which has identical features as the Onkyo TX-RZ50, but costs $600 more. Installer features is what the Integra generally has over the top of an Onkyo, because that's it's a different.
Yeah, they might have a few more hooks in there for like a Crestron system or something like that. Although
RS-232 control and stuff like that.
Yeah, the RZ50 has an RS-232 port and works with all those systems too. So they're virtually identical. It's more of a cosmetic change than anything else. So I mean, I'd be perfectly happy. I mean, look. Those are good receivers. I'm not going to say, hey, if you find the user interface of Denon and Marantz annoying, and you find the user interface of Onkyo easier to use, I'm like, get the Onkyo. Go for it, because it's still.
I mean, even the Sony for that matter. I mean, even though I think that the room correction on the Denons, Marantz's, and Yamahas is going to be better than what you're getting on.
But I mean, the Onkyos have Dirac now,
Dirac,
and it's right there. So I mean, as long as you're willing to put the time in and use that system, they can do fantastic results. Just like the other ones can. So yeah, I mean, I've no beef with that. And yeah, there isn't really, particularly with the RZ50 and the DRX 5.4, there's a bigger difference when you go down to the TX NR 7100 versus the Integra version, which I think is the 3.4, because in that one, the Integra version has a full set of pre-outs and the Onkyo doesn't. So you can add an external amplifier to the Integra version of that model, even though they're sister models, and feature-wise, for what's built in, they're virtually identical, but one has a full set of pre-outs in the Integra and the Onkyo doesn't. But in the RZ50, that isn't the case. In the RZ50 versus the DRX 5.4, they really are essentially identical. So I would absolutely get the Onkyo and save the money.
All right. Joe and Karl. Joe found the write-ups about Trinov's active acoustics double bass array intriguing, since he's planning his next from-the-ground-up home theater build, where he'd have total control over the room's dimensions and construction. He's curious what we think about potentially going for a double bass array installation. If you can completely optimize the room for it, could you use a much less expensive processor than a Trinov Altitude to accomplish this same result?
Well, on paper, that's the idea.
Yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? That it's just basically... Yeah,
it is meant to be simplified. You could use a mini DSP to manually set up the planar wave at the front, and then you are just copying that to the back subwoofers, but reversing the polarity 180 degrees. So that it can be accomplished on paper. Where Trinov is doing something different is realizing that real world rooms, even when you have total control over the dimensions and the construction of the thing, real rooms are not completely acoustically symmetrical and acoustically perfect. Even if you're like, yeah, I built this thing perfectly square and perfectly flat walls, it's like, there's some little acoustic anomalies that happen in the real world pretty much no matter what you do, no matter how careful you are. So the Trinov processing is there to make the measurements of all that and apply small changes to those that array of front subwoofers to have that planar wave actually be a planar wave in your acoustic space as opposed to an on-paper acoustic space where theoretically it's relatively easy to set up. But like I really question if...
So those of you that don't remember from last week or maybe didn't hear last week's podcast, the idea here is that you have a bunch of subwoofers in your front wall or at the front of your home theater, a bunch of subwoofers at the back wall, and they are playing the same content, so that out of phase, right? The back ones in reverse phase.
Yeah, the back ones are 180 reverse polarity at the back.
And the sound waves come out, and therefore they can't, they cancel each other out to a certain extent. So
the more important part is actually creating that planar wave at the front.
Yeah.
This idea that you have essentially a two-dimensional flat surface of a wave going straight down your rectangular room and not imparting any reflections off the side walls as it goes. So that's really the on paper advantage with a big question mark of a double bass array setup. But like I say, do we actually want anechoic bass? Is that really what we want in our rooms? I highly question whether anechoic bass is truly a desirable thing. So I mean, given that, no matter what you do, you're going to need multiple subwoofers. I think you basically need 4 in the front wall and 4 in the back wall at a minimum.
Right.
And then attempting to calibrate that manually, the likelihood that you're actually going to generate a planar wave in a real acoustic space as opposed to on paper, I question that. And then the result of it, if it works as planned, being truly anechoic bass, I'm like, I think I'm just going to get 4 subwoofers and do a pretty traditional setup.
Yeah.
It seems a lot more reasonable.
I feel like this is like... well, I feel a lot like this is that meta material in those KEF speakers.
This is an academic.
Technically, it does something, and it's not nothing, and that it is it is theoretically desirable. But the real effects in your room, what you're really experiencing, you're like, I think you'll be, for most people in most rooms, there's 2 or 3 seating positions they care about. And you can totally get great bass in those positions.
Yeah, you sure can.
With 2 and definitely with 4 subwoofers just placed in the corners and being done with it. Just have a rectangular enclosed room, throw 4 subwoofers in the corner, and you're done versus everything that Rob's talking about.
Wants a little bit of room gain? Doesn't it just feel weird to have no sense of the room whatsoever?
I mean, you can EQ it. You can EQ it up, and I think then you're like, okay, well, I just did all this, so I get this crazy flat bass, and the first thing I'm going to do is go, this doesn't sound right, and then boost it up. That's okay. I'm not saying that I haven't said that that's desirable in a speaker, and I've talked about it multiple times before, that you should have a ruler flat speaker so that you can adjust the curve to your liking. I have said that. I think that even for me, this is too much. This has gone beyond practical. I think that that if the difference is buying a not flat speaker versus buying a flat speaker and prices are about the same, you get the flat speaker because then you're being accurate. Versus this, which is
also,
so much more money and so much more time and effort.
I kind of worry about the subwoofer to speaker transition, that crossover, because the speakers aren't generating planar waves, and they're playing bass. They're playing below 500 hertz.
Yeah.
And I question whether that's really going to be the best way to do things.
I put it to you this way, Karl. If you're really, really interested in this,
this was Joe doing this part.
Joe, are we? Oh, yeah. Okay, Joe. If you're really interested in this, then what I would say is, do not invest in this until you can hear a demo. An actual live setup demo in a real room, not on a showroom floor or something like that, but in a real room, meaning that
like hotel room type of thing.
Well, yeah, or even in a because when I say showroom, I mean like at CES or CD or something like that, where they set up a little room and then they on the show floor, and then they try to give you these demos, because those don't ever work as well as you think that they should. I'm talking about you go to a dealer and they have a room that is set up specifically to give you this experience, and then listen to it and say, okay, because that would be more accurate to what you might actually get. And then if you hear it, you're like, this is exactly what I want. Well, then you know.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that just reading about this on paper and saying, that sounds cool, I don't think that's enough in this case. I think you need to have a more hands-on experience or ears-on experience. Karl also read up on Trinov's presentation at ISE and got the distinct impression that, much like we suspected, listeners weren't actually blown away by the bass coming from those 16 subwoofers. It was very uniform and no boominess whatsoever, no matter where you sat, but that didn't really seem to blow anybody's minds. But in terms of actually using a system like that, the demo room they built for it at ISE was much larger than most people's home theaters, more like the size of one of the smaller theaters in the megaplex. So would Trinov's active acoustics even work in a room that's maybe half the size? I mean, on paper, it does. On paper, it does. I like we just said, I question whether or not this is something that you'd want to experience on the regular. Yeah, I don't know. I also wonder, I wonder how, curves of equal loudness are going to work in this space and everything else. I have a lot of questions. And I'm not saying that. What really comes down to for me is I look at this and go, that's a lot of money and effort to do a thing that you can get most of the way there with two subwoofers in opposing corners. You know what I mean? For the experience that you're going to have at your seat, I don't know that you're going to, like, if it was going to be like significantly better than what you could experience by getting just two subwoofers in opposing corners and calling it a day, I would be like, okay, well, we need to start thinking about this and how can we get this down to a price point and a usability that's more reasonable versus, it's better on paper and maybe pretty cool, but
well, like this does make a whole lot more sense when you do have a 75-seat theater and some of those seats are right against the back wall. Yeah. And even with a pretty good 4-subwoofer setup, you're still going to have some seats that aren't great. Yeah. And it's like, no, I want every seat to be great. Well, then you got to do something extra, and a double bass array makes sense there. If you got a 3-seater couch, I don't think it makes sense on a practical level. On academic level, it's interesting, but on a practical level, I don't think it makes sense in that scenario.
Dazz. One of Dazz's kids has moved out for college, so naturally that somehow means he figures he has room for more speakers in his theater now. He likes the idea of expanding from a 5.2.4 to a 9.2.4, and that means front wide, so him and Rob can be two of the five people that experience such things in their home theaters. He's already measured out where they could fit at the perfect plus or minus 30-degree angles that Rob insists is important.
I do.
There's a picture here that you can see on the Flickr album or on the YouTube video, and he says, don't worry, his two subs are positioned with one at the front of the room and one at the back. This is just an automatically generated diagram. Anyways, whatever. He's got
it put two subs at the front of the room. He knew you would have a problem with that. That's not reality. Okay. It's not a picture. It's just a diagram.
So all of his speakers are Ascend SE series. He has finally decided that if he's going to fully upgrade his speakers, he will wait until he can afford the Sierra RAW series and won't be getting the SE2 models to replace his SE series, which I think we talked about that last time. At some point. Adding another pair of HTM 200 SES surround backs is an easy decision. For the front wides, he figures he'll get a pair of CBM 170 SEs. He already owns an Emotiva XPA3 Gen 3 amplifier. He knows that when he used his Denon X4400H receiver to power all 9 speakers in his current setup, the noise floor noticeably jumped up versus when it was powering only 7 speakers. Adding the Emotiva 3-channel amp totally solved that. But if he gets a new receiver that can do 13 channels with 11 amps built in, plus at least a 2-channel external amp, will he need some more external amp channels to avoid that higher noise floor issue again? If he only uses an XP3, he'd be asking his new receiver to power 10 speakers itself. If more external amps would be beneficial, what we recommend getting? I mean, some of these speakers are going to be ridiculously close to you, so literally almost any amplifier will work. I mean, we've suggested Fosse and some of these other ones before.
For sure.
I have no problem saying power all your Atmos speakers with very small little Class D or whatever the Fosses are, little amplifiers. I think all of those are fine for that.
Yeah, the Fosse TDA 7498, lovely little Class D 2-channel amplifier. That's almost certainly what I would go for. Yeah. In my experience, with my X6700H. Once you get to 9, 10, 11 speakers being powered all by that one AV receiver, the noise floor does jump up. That continues to happen. I think like 7, absolutely, and I think if you're having it power channels that aren't really utilized nearly as much, like having your AV receiver power overheads and your surround backs, that having it do 8 speakers is totally fine. So I think all you would really need to do is maybe add another 2-channel amp, and I would absolutely go for one of the little Class D Fossies, the 7498, and have it do your surround backs or something like that.
Yeah. He says, would there be any benefit to swapping a CMT 340 SE center for a CBM 170 SE bookshelf? He got to worrying about the whole MTM center layout thing, but he's also thinking that getting used to the additional height of the 170 as a center would help him prepare his system for when he eventually gets a Sierra Horizon RAL center, which is large and quite tall. My lord, this man wants to spend some money. I was going to say before we even got to this question that I think that this is just ridiculous. I don't think I would do any of this.
The whole thing?
The whole thing. I think that you're quite literally, like, all this money that you're trying to spend on these speakers to go from a 5.2.4 to a 9.2.4, you're going to get to the end and go, not only do I not notice that much of a difference, but the differences that I do notice aren't particularly positive. As far as
I do have to say, like, actual Atmos content, actual DTSX content, there's a lot of time when those front wides aren't doing anything, because the only time they make any sound in those formats is when there is an audio object that was created to send sound into those locations, and most mixers aren't really utilizing that in the floor level. Surround backs, there's some 7.1 content, but in general, like, the difference between hearing those come from surround back speakers versus just having your existing surround speakers play those same sounds, it's a pretty small difference. So, I mean, I have to, like, this is a significant amount of money, like, in the AV receiver more than anything else.
Save it for the new speakers you're planning on upgrading to. That's what I think.
I can't fully disagree with that at all. Yeah.
We're talking about new amps, new receiver, new speakers.
Some new speakers. Yeah.
Save it all. Just save it all.
I definitely wouldn't go replacing your CMT 340 SE center with a CBM 170 SE just standing vertically.
I just love people who are like,
I definitely,
I don't think I have a problem, but now that I read this about there being a problem, maybe I do have a problem. No, man, you answered your question. You don't have a problem because you never noticed there being a problem.
Right. And I don't think if and when you get a Sierra Horizon that you had to have prepared yourself with a taller speaker beforehand. I think you'll adjust just fine.
Yeah, I think it'll. Come on. You know what? And I have never mentioned this on the podcast, but one thing that cracks me up, and it happens every once in a while, especially when I'm injured, is, I end up having to do physical therapy. I mean, I climb, I cycle. There's always something. I'm 50 years old. There's always something broken on me. Something always hurts. Like, my little pinky right now does this weird popping thing where I can't get it to go, like, in some positions because it just pops out. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe it's arthritis. I don't know. I don't want to go to the doctor because they're just going to tell me that buy expensive creams or something. I don't care. But when something's really wrong, I have to do physical therapy.
Sure. And
it's hilarious how many times I lie on the ground in my home theater to do my stretches or whatever while there's content playing. I go, this isn't stereo. I had no idea this was all these people who are talking about how important the center channel is. I'm sitting in my own home theater, like 6.5 feet away from my center channel, have no clue that it's not playing. And I don't always sit dead center. I often sit off to the side or whatever. It never, like, the Phantom Center works so good without me ever knowing it because of the stupid Xbox and how it encodes everything into Atmos no matter what you do. I can't tell you how often people worry about things that don't matter. And in my own home theater, I lie on the ground and go, crap, the center channel's not even playing. I had no idea.
Yep.
All right. To continue on, he says, in his living room upstairs, they made an effort to avoid putting the TV above the fireplace. There's only one flat wall, so the TV went there, standing on top of credenza. I don't know what a credenza is. I guess a
TV stand.
Yeah.
Yes.
There wasn't room below the bottom edge of the TV for a center speaker, so he just put a pair of bookshelf speakers on either side of the TV and runs things with a Phantom center. I can't believe that I talked about this already. He already owns a center speaker that matches those bookshelves and never do any critical viewing up there. But the way the seats are laid out, there isn't actually any seat that's right in the sweet spot, so nobody's getting the ideal Phantom center image effect. Would it be worth going to the hassle of figuring out how to add a center to the system, or would it actually introduce additional problems that might make things sound worse? The living room is not an acoustically treated space. I'm going to have to get some more liquid because I'm completely out and I'm starting to cough. Yes. But these speakers are literally like practically attached to the side of this TV, which is far too small. Either side. Yeah. The TV is too small for the space, so it's not like this massive screen that's taking up like their field of view that it should. It's basically mono that you're experiencing, and I would worry, like, again, has anybody ever gone, oh, it doesn't sound like the voices are coming from the TV, it sounds like the voices are coming from the left side of the TV? Said nobody. Nobody in this room ever said that, and you're worried about it. Now, first of all, will it introduce problems? I honestly think the only thing it can do is introduce problems. I don't think it can make a positive impact. I think it'll sound either exactly the same or worse than what you currently have. So that's what I think. Rob, you can say what you want. I'm going to go.
Sure. Yeah, I don't really think that you need to do this. If it's a hassle, I wouldn't bother. Like, exactly as Tom just explained, all the reasons why the current setup, it's not going to sound tremendously different. I will just offer that if you do want to do it, you can absolutely replace the feet on your television. Amazon sells oodles of universal TV stands, which just look like a regular central pedestal stand, but it has a Visa mount on the back. So it's the exact same type of connection that you would have for a wall mount, but instead of it actually hanging on the wall, it just attaches to a self-freestanding pedestal, and now you can adjust the height between the the credenza, the top of the credenza, and the bottom edge of the television. It's a easy and very good-looking way of raising the height of the television just enough to conveniently fit the center speaker below the bottom edge of the TV without having to put the center speaker inside of the credenza, where that would introduce some issues. So yeah, that would be the way that I would do it if you want to go to that hassle, but I agree with Tom in general that you really don't need to. I don't expect it's going to make a tremendous difference. So I'll go ahead while Tom is away here on to our next question here, which is from Henry. Henry says he's a longtime listener of the show. He has a Marantz SR7015 AV receiver, and he has connected an Anthem PVA-7, which is a 7x125 watt 7-channel external amplifier to power his Paradigm Premier series speakers. He's using the large 600C center that really is like a tower turned on its side, but with the tweeter and mid-range in a vertical stack in the middle of that, and the 200B bookshelf speakers as his front three. So he says his room is treated with acoustic panels, but he did not detail exactly what kind of panels or where exactly the panels are placed or exactly how many. Didn't have that info in his email. So his center speaker is on top of an AV cabinet, so it is above his television. And when he ran Odyssey, it set his center to minus 7.5, his front, left, and right speakers to minus 4.5, and his surrounds to minus 10. So I imagine he's sitting relatively close to all of these speakers, because the Paradigm Premier are reasonably efficient, but not crazy efficient speakers. So if it's automatically setting his trim levels to these minus figures, then there's no way he's sitting terribly far away from any of these. So he has experienced a persistent lack of dialogue clarity in this system. He contacted Marantz's support, and they suggested simply raising the center's channel trim level, but that did help make dialogue more intelligible, but it was obvious that the center was playing louder than his front, left, and right speakers, so it didn't sound properly balanced across the front soundstage if something were to pan. So then he tried using the Multi-Cue Editor app, and essentially just set the center speaker to a completely flat line of a target curve, and that cleared up dialogue quite a bit, he says, without having to raise its trim level significantly higher than the front, left, and right. But again, there was an obvious, at least to him, mismatch in the timbre of the sound across his front three speakers this way. So, furthermore, he says when he went to listen to Top Gun Maverick, it was still difficult to understand dialogue with that particular movie, so it wasn't a total success in terms of a fix. So, he has run Odyssey numerous times now. He's consistently run into this dialogue intelligibility issue. What else should he be doing it differently? And is this maybe just the thing that he's read about where, modern movies are themselves mixed in such a way that the dialogue is low and difficult to hear. Is that all that's going on here? So, yeah, Tom is back. Any thoughts on that?
So he didn't really delineate where his acoustic panels are, and that would have been my absolute first question, which is, do you have one behind your head, and how close are you to a back wall, and that sort of thing. The fact that you have your speakers so close to you suggests to me that you're in a very small space, or that you're in a very large space, but your speakers are extremely close to you, which...
I would certainly guess that from just what the trim levels were set to. Yeah, I don't see what else could be the case.
In -10, it's extremely it's extremely
well for
low.
The surrounds, so they got to be right beside them. And then -7.5 for your center. Like that's pretty significant for Paradigm Premier speakers. That's quite a bit.
That's quite a bit. So I am surprised that it's setting them so low, which means that they're very physically close to you, or there's a lot of some sort of boosting going on based on the reflectiveness of the room and everything else. But even with that, I would not expect it to be -10 to -7.5. There's a lot to consider here, and with not enough information, it's almost impossible for us to give you a definite answer as to what's going on. Yeah. In my opinion, the first thing I would be questioning you is about what's going on behind your head. Yeah. As far as dialogue and intelligibility, the slap echo is your big problem. Because
there's two scenarios where what is behind you makes a huge difference. One is you're sitting very close to your back wall, and the back wall is reflective. The other is, ironically, the polar opposite of having a tremendous amount of space behind you. And, like, for example, it's open to your entire kitchen and dining room behind you, which happens in a lot of people's setups. And while you've treated the theater area in front, the side walls, and maybe the front wall, you haven't treated the kitchen and the dining room behind you, and they are just echoing back there. And that can make a big difference. The scenario where even if the room isn't treated, we wouldn't expect just the raw acoustics to have a big impact on dialogue is the medium scenario, where you've got a nice 7 feet behind you of space, but then there is a wall, 7 feet behind you. It isn't just open to an echoey area. There, it might not be like absolutely optimal, but we wouldn't anticipate those acoustics from behind you to have a big problem there. The other thing is, given that we're suspecting your speakers are very close to you, but we know your center, this gigantic Paradigm center that you have, is above your TV.
Right.
That could have an impact, because that would mean, if we're correct in our assumption that you really are quite close to it based on that trim level setting, if you haven't tilted it down, or you have tilted it down but recessed it back, like for physical stability reasons that I could totally understand, you could literally be either occluding some of the sound if you've tilted it down so that it would be aiming right at you, but for physical stability you've pushed it back on that AV cabinet, so it's really firing its sound like into the top of that AV cabinet, or you have it more or less pointed straight forward or only slightly angled down, but it isn't really aiming at your face, which means it is bouncing a lot off of whatever is behind you, whether that's a close wall or a really far wall. There are just, like, in this case, directional things. Because when we're talking about dialogue intelligibility, we are talking about the consonant sounds. That's what lets us tell what somebody is saying. We can hear the vowels just fine. I'm sure you can hear the vowels just fine. It's those consonant sounds. Those are high-frequency directional sounds that do need to be directed at your ears, particularly when you're right up close to them. So this could be a physical setup thing. Quite easily, this could be a physical setup
thing. When you're
thing.
as close to the speakers as I think that you are, little bits of angle make a big difference because of how off or on axis you are to each of these, of the tweeter and the drivers and everything else, but the tweeter in particular. And I've said it before, but there's a lot of speakers that you don't necessarily want to be directly on axis to, but there's even more speakers that once you get a certain amount off axis, things get bad right away.
Quite quickly. There is another thing, which is that we know his center is in some way sitting on top of this AV cabinet. Right. I don't know how decoupled that center speaker is from that AV cabinet. That center speaker, the huge 600C, is very capable of outputting bass, and if you have that entire AV cabinet resonating with the bass that's coming out of that center speaker, which is entirely plausible, that can mask the mid-range and treble to a tremendous degree and make it very difficult to understand dialogue. So two things that could be done there if you haven't done them is A, decouple that center speaker very well, make sure that it is very padded beneath it, and maybe use some museum putty for physical stability, and make sure that it isn't translating physical vibrations into the AV cabinet. The other thing you could do is try raising the crossover frequency so that you have less bass coming out of that big center speaker and potentially physically vibrating the entire AV cabinet along with it, which could definitely be masking some sound. The thing I would really like you to try, if you're willing to, would be physically moving that center speaker. I'm not talking permanently, but temporarily. Right. Physically moving that center speaker so that it's in the position that's closer to your ear level, maybe just slightly below your TV, or since this is temporary, maybe literally in front of your TV at ear level. Try it that way, and if that makes a huge difference, then I think that physical placement above your TV on that AV cabinet might be a lot of what's going on here. There's multiple things I can think of that we've just mentioned that plausibly could explain what's going on here. So the only last thing I would say is, if using your multi-cue editor app, setting the center speaker to essentially a flat line of a target curve worked out well, there's no reason you can't do that for your front, left, and right speakers too, and get the timbre match closer to what you want it to be when sounds pan across. That might be the easiest solution in all of this.
Yeah. I would also, and this doesn't seem to be the case, I wouldn't think that this would be an issue, but one of the things I would do is go put my ear next to every single one of the drivers in your center channel and make sure that they're all working.
Yeah,
there could
make
be
sure there's no blown tweeter going on.
Yeah, the blown tweeter would be the thing that would concern me, and the upping of the
Although if changing his EQ made a noticeable difference, it's unlikely that's
like I said, I don't think that that's the issue, but I would still, it's a no-cost test. You just walk up to it and just
why not do it?
Just put your ear next to it. Infinite Gary was listening to a Hank Penny CD. It was in mono, so that's exciting for him. It was playing. He was playing it from his dead-end disc player, sending a 2-channel analog signal to his Anthem Pre-Pro in regular stereo 2-channel listening mode. It absolutely sounded as though it was strictly playing through a center speaker, even though it wasn't. Definitely sounded mono, a bit too much for his personal preference. I thought we all wanted to listen to things as they were intended to be listened to. Isn't that how we're supposed to want to listen to things?
And mono is the way that you can hear whether there's really a difference between your speakers or not.
There you go. Mono.
It's all the things.
So he tried some of the Anthem's other listening mode options, and when he landed on Anthem Logic Music, Anthem Logic -music, the soundstage sounded a little wider and more pleasing to him. He still heard the illusion that the center speaker was playing, even though he walked right up to a speaker and confirmed that it wasn't, but it no longer sounded quite so narrow and pinpoint at his seat. How is the Anthem Logic Music listening mode achieving that effect?
It puts some sound into your surround speakers.
Does it really?
Yeah, it puts a little bit of sound into the surround speakers. That's it. That's the explanation. Okay. There's now some sound coming from beside you instead of only from in front of you. So that's what did it.
Christian thinks Legacy Audio's Phantom HD surround speaker is particularly attractive in terms of its looks. I'm going to have to click on this, like that, and then I'll come back to here and read. With its multiple angled surfaces, it looks like a lighting scone from an upscale movie theater, but a little over 21 inches wide. It's too big for the columns in his home theater where he mounts his surround speakers. It just wouldn't look right with a little bit of the sides of the speaker hanging over the edges. So do we know of any other surround speakers that he could mount in his columns that don't just look like boxes mounted to his walls? Let me look. And okay, this is a strange
so
speaker.
It's got sort of a little bit of a triangular sort of shape to it, but then also angled. So yeah, it does look very much like several light sconces. That are out there. So
it looks like those Axiom Q speaker with a QS.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. Which, hey, I didn't have that on my list, but Axiom's Q8 quadrupolar surrounds might have a little bit of the look that you're going for. They don't look exactly like this, but
don't get the small ones of those, though. They suck.
Right.
They're real bad. The bigger ones are better because I've owned both. And the bigger ones are objectively better than the smaller ones. So.
Okay. So so there we go. We'll add the axioms to the list. But I did want to mention, I mean, the first and foremost that came to mind is if you were already thinking that legacy audio has the sound quality that you want, well, they have a smaller surround speaker called the Deco. That mounts very similarly and has a pretty similar shape. It just doesn't have the sideways firing drivers that the Phantom surround has. But the Deco is definitely going to be about as close as you can get, I would say. Costs less money as well, but will have similar sound quality. It's just that it's a monopole speaker instead of being a tripole speaker like the Phantom, but a pretty similar design. So one other one that I like, Focal in their Cora series, the Cora surround. I mean, it's a monopole speaker just firing forward as normal, but has at least a little bit of interest to its design. It's got some slanted sides that make it look a little bit different. I should mention, going back to that legacy Deco, it's 14 inches wide instead of 21 and a half, so significantly narrower from side to side. I think would fit on most columns I'm imagining are going to be 16 inch, right? 16 inch on center.
Sorry.
So, I think the 14 inch width is going to work just fine there. The full Cora surround is 12.5 inches wide, so if you need even narrower, that could work if you're okay with those looks. So I'll go through some other options that I just think are possibilities. Sticking with Focal in their Sopra series, right? If you want to go way up to the beryllium tweeters that they offer, in the Sopra series, they have the Surround BE standing for beryllium. So this is a pretty traditional bipole design where you have the two sets of drivers, the tweeter and mid-range, on either side of what is normally like a trapezoid, but this one is just curved. It's nicely curved, which makes it representative, reminiscent of a lot of wall sconces as well. Lighting sconces are often this sort of dome shape, so that could be an option. That's 16.5 inches wide, so it might be maybe just a little bit too wide for the column if it's exactly 16. Going over to other brands, Revel, they have surround speakers that can mount to the wall as well, so that could be another option there that gives you at least some angled sides that don't look just like a box on your wall. I like the channel that they put on the back of the Revels as well that aids with your wire management if you aren't doing just completely in-wall wiring with those. If you go over to Martin Logan, in their Motion series, they have their Motion FX surround, which again is sort of this curved shape to it. So it's similar to the trapezoidal designs where it's got drivers firing out at two different angles, but in a curved shape. And then their brand new Motion MP10, which looks mostly boxy, but is more of this wedge shaped design. So you can mount that at a bit of an angle if you want to, and has a nice finish option on that. The Martin Logan Motions are just in particular coming to mind because you've got the folded ribbon tweeters in there, just like the legacy audio has. So I was just thinking that could be a possibility that would match up well. Then, some of our usual suspects going to other brands that wouldn't have folded motion tweeters. I think SVS's Ultra surrounds really look quite nice. They are a pretty traditional trapezoidal design, but I think they look quite nice as surrounds. And then over at Aperion, if you do want to get back to a folded ribbon tweeter, they have their wedge-shaped ones in their Theatris series, right. Theatris surrounds, which are a pretty regular, looking surround speaker, getting pretty close to just a slanted box at this point, but just another option that has the folded ribbon tweeter.
Yeah, and those QS8s from Axiom, ridiculous.
Yeah,
$1,000 a pair.
Oh boy, they used to be like $450.
Yeah, they've gone up in price. I don't think they've changed that much in technology, but you do have a lot of finish options, which do not increase the price. So if you're looking for a very specific wood grain finish, they have a whole bunch of options that you can choose from there, and they're 11 inches wide. Where are we at here? Time-wise. Greg did a lot of reading, including my articles on AV Gadgets, all about bass management using multiple subwoofers, and he thought he had a handle on it. Even the forum goers seemed to mostly agree about pressurizing a room evenly and using multiple subs to create uniform bass across all of your seats, even though they might fight about the exact method of using those multiple subs.
Yes, they might.
They just want full Martys. That's all they want. Full Martys, whatever the heck those things are. But a couple things have him confused yet again. This is the first is this new DRAC active room treatment, DRAC Art program. Mm-hmm. From what he could glean about it, it uses the subwoofers and all the speakers to do basically bass noise cancellation, right?
Sort of a similar idea.
Yeah. But if DRAC Art is using each of the speakers to cancel out some unwanted hump or dip in the bass, does it then need to somehow try to cancel out the sound that came from the speakers elsewhere in the room. Like at one certain spot, if you just played the subwoofers, maybe you have a big dip that you want to fix. So fine, you set out a sound from a nearby speaker that cancels out that dip at that spot. But the sound doesn't just stop. Bass is omnidirectional, right? So haven't you just created some new problem at some other spot in the room? It seems like it's promising to somehow deliver directional location bass, but all in an attempt to ultimately create uniform, even bass. But how can both be happening at the same time? Yeah. It's complex. And I don't know that I fully understand how this is going to actually work in a room. Like, I understand the idea of it better than how I know it'll that you'll actually experience it. Putting a microphone in one or a couple of spots in a room and saying, okay, here's some of the room issues that we're having, the modes that we're having in the room, and then playing cancellation waves out of other speakers in order to help cancel them is essentially the idea here. Now, will you be making more problems in the room? I mean, in theory, no, but in practicality, just like we're talking about this double
bass
Anthem
array
thing, double bass array, it's one thing to make it work on paper. It's another thing to make it work in a room that is non-uniform, because rooms aren't exact rectangles, that is got furniture and people and dogs and doors that are sometimes open and sometimes closed in it, outside sounds going on, room treatments. I mean, there's a lot of things that can change how this stuff works. So
I think the problem here is that we actually need to get away from the idea that this is just some form of noise cancellation.
Yeah.
I think having that in your mind is actually messing up understanding what it's trying to do. This is closer to attempting to do, not across the entire frequency range in the bass, wave field synthesis. It's the notion that below the transition frequency of the room, where the room takes over and you're never hearing a direct sound, you're always hearing a reflected sound below the transition frequency of the room. What you're dealing with is a wave pattern in the room. You're no longer dealing with directional bass. You're no longer dealing with a sound that made a straight line from something that generated that sound to your ear. You are always only hearing reflected sound, and that's where they're focusing. So this is more like trying to build a big blanket, build a foundation, as opposed to trying to cancel out a particular sound or even a droning sound. This is more about trying to create this very uniform thing across the entire thing. So I think we need to get away from the idea that this is noise cancellation, because it isn't really. Where this is very different from traditional bass optimization, like with multi-sub optimizer, right? You're thinking, how is this very different from that? Well, in multi-sub optimizer, all of the bass producing things, all of the subwoofers are initially getting the same signal. They're all initially getting the same signal, and then maybe on each one of them you alter the timing, the level, and some equalization of that signal, so that when they all play together, you try and get this nice uniform even bass everywhere in the room. What Dirac Art is attempting to do is not send the same signal to all of the bass-producing things. It's saying, I have these subwoofers, they're all going to play the same thing. They're still using Dirac Live Bass Management. You still do that first to just get the subwoofers doing as well as they can. But then for just the seats where you measure, if there are still any anomalies in those seats, it calculates just the signal that needs to be sent from what else can produce the bass. Well, the speakers in your room. That's the only thing left is send those out, specific signals that aren't the entire bass signal, just the specific things for where you measured to correct for those things. So it is a... whether this is really going to work in every room is still questionable. It's still a question that's up in the air. But yeah, if we get away from the idea that it's active noise cancellation, because it isn't. It's wave field synthesis.
Yeah, clear as mud. If you watch a certain crop of YouTubers, they'll talk about how amazing it is to have truly full-range speakers for every channel, or a subwoofer paired with every single speaker to deliver directional bass. But is that just an Emperor's New Clothes type of situation? Is bass actually omnidirectional or not? it is. Well, I mean, it depends on what frequencies you're actually talking about and where
and the setting, yeah. where you are,
where you are in that. But in a normal room in your home, bass is omnidirectional. You do not hear any bass directly from the subwoofer. It bounces first before you hear it. Okay,
right.
It will. And in fact, it doesn't just bounce once; it's going to bounce a bunch.
The length of the wave is longer than the dimensions of your room, so there is no way for even a single cycle of that wave to have formed in the time it took for the wave to move from the subwoofer to your ears. So there is no way to hear those sounds in a room before it has reflected off of a surface. So that is where the omnidirectionality comes from.
Right.
The other area of trying to pinpoint the location of where bass sounds came from is because when we're pinpointing where treble sounds came from, we are triangulating based on the distance between our two human ears, which is less than a foot for most people's heads anyway.
Yeah.
Which means that anything that's beyond 4 times that, so even if we're being generous and you have a very wide head that's where your ears are a foot apart, any wavelength that's longer than 4 feet, you're not going to be able to just purely triangulate that very well. Now, you're going to be able to get some secondary cues from reflections and timing cues and things like that we also use to be able to pinpoint where a sound came from at sounds a little bit lower than that. But I mean, 4 feet is essentially, 250 hertz? Yeah, right, more or less. It's a little bit higher than that. It's a little bit higher than that. So, I mean, again, we're getting into this. Yeah, 250 hertz is about where we can't tell where the sound came from anymore. We can't triangulate it. It's in most rooms. It's going to be, we're going to get into where it's reflected off of things at that point. We're hearing reflections more than we are any directional sounds. So, in a room, yeah, around 250 hertz is where it starts to become omnidirectional. So this directional bass, what's going on there? There are harmonics. There are harmonics in any of the bass sounds that are produced. If you produce a 200 hertz fundamental, there are going to be 400 and 800 and 1600 hertz harmonics that go along with that. Those are being played by the speakers, and you can absolutely tell where those came from. Yeah. So it's an illusion.
And I've talked about that multiple times on AV Gadgets as well. And we've talked about it on this podcast. It's this idea that I heard... I mean, we talked about it last week. I heard a thing, therefore I know what caused it, and there's so much more past just experiencing a thing to be able to understand what that thing is that you experienced, and there's a lot of science behind it, and there's a lot of science that's unintuitive. Like I played, I'm listening to this music and I could tell where the bass is coming from. Okay, but is it really the bass that's giving you those directional cues, or is it, these other sounds that are in there that are giving you the directional cues that your brain's just like, oh, if all that's coming from there, so is the bass, and there's a lot more to it than just saying, oh, well, I heard it. And the YouTuber, these people that you hear online and stuff like that, I don't necessarily begrudge them for being excited about what they're experiencing and getting, because I mean, I see it all the time.
But again, they've almost certainly changed more than one variable. Like if you went from whatever your previous setup was to suddenly having full range speakers in every location, I'm betting those are either entirely new speakers or something else changed in that system. It's not the same anymore. It's not that the only thing you changed
Odyssey
is making them full range.
Or whatever makes it change. I mean, I run Odyssey more than once, and I'm going to get different settings each time. I can't tell you how many times. I can actually, but I won't tell you how many times Andrew has reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, this new product is great. It's a major difference over my last thing." I'm like, really? Did you listen to this? Oh, no. But I was listening to this music and I heard a massive difference. I'm like, all right, well, go back and listen to these sweeps, or go back and do this test, or go back and do that test. And after I send him back a couple of times, he comes back to me. He's like, so I guess they basically sound the same. I mean, there is a difference, but it's not the massive difference. And these guys... excitement as anger,
if you're trying to get views,
anger and excitement are contagious. Okay, that's why so much content online is either mad or excited. There is no people who are just like, I'm very content right now. Let me share my contentment with you, because that's not what people want to read. They're
Just
like, that's
scream
boring.
at you right in the greeting just to get your attention.
Yes, they are. They are excited about this, and that they're going to write their stuff or create their content when they're in that excited mindset. They're not going to go back and it doesn't do them any good to go back and say, well, I did some tests and now I can, I don't know, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. That doesn't do anything.
I bet that video gets fewer views. Yeah, I wouldn't call it entirely Emperor's New Clothes, as in there's when you're saying directional base is a thing that you should chase after, that I'm going to say is Emperor's New Clothes. But yeah, the other part, it's misattribution. Once again, our favorite thing.
So bottom line, he asks how many subwoofers is actually enough. There is no exactly right answer except for two, but there's no exactly right answer for this because it is set up and room dependent. If you told me your room and your room is a rectangle with an enclosed rectangle, the exact right answer is 2. You could make the argument for 4. I
will make the argument for 4,
but I think that objectively or subjectively, in most rooms where in most houses, 2 is the actual number, because anything more than that, the differences are either not noticeable or not noticeable enough for me to say that you need the other 2.
Yeah, from 1 to 2 is the gigantic difference.
It's a big joke, yeah.
And I mean, I could make the argument for 3, to be honest, that 3 is the actually enough, because then you can really utilize the multi-sub optimizer software to work very, very well.
And if you have a rectangular room, then I'm going to say 3 is probably better for that exact same reason. But and you could, okay, I'll tell you what. Let's agree on 3. And in a rectangular room, you put one in a closet and you just save it in case the other ones break. Okay, so now you have an extra sub lying around.
That's right. Or instead of putting the time into multi-sub optimizer, you get the 4th subwoofer and make your life very easy in the rectangular room.
Right. Jonathan. So after our discussion last week about Jonathan's new setup for his main house with an LG OLED and the Vizio Elevate soundbar, he's happy keeping the Elevate soundbar since he got it for only $100 more than the M series model that Rob mentioned, and he decided to take our advice and use HDMI-C as little as possible and just use his Harmony remote, which his wife is used to instead. He got it set up to run everything off their NVIDIA Shield now, so the Harmony just controls that, plus power and volume, and that's keeping both of them happy.
Hooray.
So his question is there any conceivable reason to prefer any of the LG OLED's built-in apps over the Shield's versions of those same apps? He had the thought that maybe somehow having the signal go through fewer devices might be cleaner in some way, perhaps. Or maybe there's just going to be some clash of processing in certain cases where the built-in app is sure to work properly, but maybe the Shield somehow processes things differently and could mess up an SDR to HDR switch or virtually upmix the sound on its own or something like that. As long as it's not going through an Xbox.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a common thought, and I have it too. It's like get as many things out of the signal chain as possible because you have fewer places for things to get messed up. All things being equal, it's all digital. It's ones and zeros. It doesn't matter how many wires or boxes it passes through. It should go in ones and zeros and come out ones and zeros, and until it gets to the receiver where it gets turned into an analog waveform, which is played by your speakers. There should be no way of messing it up. Is there ways of messing it up? There are. Just ask Microsoft. They've got them all. But there should be no way of messing up. But there are reasons to use one device's apps versus another device's apps, and that's depending on how recently that app's been updated and what features that app has. And we know that in LG's case, there are internal apps that do things that other apps don't do. I cannot remember what they are right now. Rob will tell you in a second. But there are apps that in the past have done that. Do they still do it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, it's all about convenience. And I will use a device that is subpar, see my complaints about my Xbox, simply because it's more convenient because everything's there. Right. And I'd rather do that than have to switch devices back and forth because it pisses my wife off. And it actually bugs me too. I don't want to have to wait for my inputs to change and everything else. I just want to go from one app to the other, so I'll use the device that has all the apps on it.
Yeah, so in terms of audio and video quality, like what the hardware is capable of or what using a secondary device instead of the built-in apps, that is not the concern. It's not that you're somehow going to get better audio video quality just from an inherent hardware level, from the built-in apps versus the NVIDIA Shield. This is all about the app itself. Is it written to take advantage of what the hardware is capable of doing, or have they been a little bit lazy and not actually taken advantage of everything the NVIDIA Shield hardware can do? And the one obvious example that comes to mind is YouTube, which is ironic because the NVIDIA Shield is running Android TV, so you'd think that, based on that, it would be great at playing YouTube, but it still doesn't play YouTube in HDR. If you want to watch HDR videos from YouTube, you're better off using the built-in app on the LG television for that particular scenario. And I mean, could there be some other apps that I'm not familiar with where there's some weird thing like that, where maybe HDR works on one version or not the other, or Atmos works on one version or not the other? That it's possible. Something like frame rate switching, right, between 24 hertz and 60 hertz, there could definitely be some differences there. So I don't know in detail exactly which apps you're using, but YouTube is the obvious example where there's a real tangible difference there, where you're able to get HDR from the built-in app and not from the NVIDIA Shield. But that's about it, for really obvious ones. So other than that, I would say stick to your NVIDIA Shield for sure, for the convenience of not taking off your wife.
Yeah. We'll do one more and then we'll be done. James.
Okay.
James and his wife have several Echo devices around their home, Amazon Echo devices. He's got whole house audio speakers or an AV receiver in several rooms, so he used the 3.5 millimeter audio output jack on the Echoes in those rooms to send out their audio to the much better speakers. But when he does that, all of the audio from the Echoes comes out of the attached speakers, and he'd really prefer for she who shall not be named voice to come out of the Echo itself while just sending music to the connected speakers. Also, for the AV receiver systems, if the receiver isn't set to the Echo's input, there's no sound at all, obviously. So ideally, the Echo would somehow recognize this and use its own built-in speaker when the AV receiver isn't set to the Echo's input. He knows that last part is probably asking, I think the first part is too, but that last part is probably asking too much, and Amazon's tech support couldn't even understand what he was asking for. Thank you, AI. Right. You made an AI cry. But an acceptable solution would simply be for the Echo's voice control to always come out of the Echo itself, but there doesn't seem to be any way to make that happen. Any suggestions? Yeah, it doesn't work as well as you want it to. Like, I want certain things. Really don't. I also have problems with it. I have quite a few problems with my Echo Dots, and one of them is that I want to be able to set a level of the voice to be a certain level all the time, no matter what I set the volume level to be. I want the level of the ringtone or the buzzer when the timer goes off to be a certain level at all times, no matter what I set everything else to be. And then I want to be able to control the volume of the music and everything else completely separately, independently, and it won't do that. It has no ability to do that.
It has one volume control,
and what you're asking is completely unacceptable. None of what you can. The way to get the Amazon Echo voice stuff to come out of the speaker is to unplug it from everything else, and then it will work just fine.
Right,
that's your only solution. Now,
well, I've got two thoughts of what could be done here.
Okay, let's hear what you got, because I would just say get either a specific speaker, powered speaker just for it, if you want to have better audio experience there, just for it, and then it does what you want at all times, or just use the internal speaker that it has, which is garbage for music for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, like, the one thought is you actually just buy more Echo devices, because you have
that's what God,
the one.
God needs. Just more.
I mean, you have the one, like literally two of them in the same room. So you have the one that talks out of its regular speaker, and then you have the other one that's attached to your sound system, and you tell the one,
but you can't
to play out of the other. That gets to be a problem.
Yeah, because you don't know which one's going to hear the voice loudest.
That's right.
That'll be the one that'll respond to you, because sometimes it'll try to respond through your AV receiver, and sometimes it won't.
Yes, exactly.
That's problematic.
The other solution, which is going to be very far from bulletproof, but about the only thing I can suggest is to not hardwire your device, to not use the 3.5 millimeter audio output jack, and to instead use Bluetooth. Because two things happen there. When you're using the Bluetooth connection, you can talk to it and say the A-lady's name to wake her up and say, disconnect or connect. And when you say disconnect, like even if it doesn't give you the response, you don't hear the chime to begin with. If you just say disconnect, so your AV receiver is on, but it's tuned to a different input, right? So you tell it disconnect, well, now it'll talk to you through its regular speaker. And then you tell it connect again, and it'll connect back to whatever it was connected via Bluetooth last time. So you can do that voice command to connect it and disconnect it. And then if you're in the scenario where it's going to an AV receiver or a Bluetooth powered amplifier and that device turns off, then it will automatically revert back to coming out of its own built-in speaker. It'll recognize that the Bluetooth connection is turned off. Now, that means you're relying on Bluetooth, and we all know how reliable that is when it comes to connections. So there's the problem.
You're saying if you tell her to disconnect from Bluetooth, then it'll start coming out of the speaker, is what you're saying.
It'll come out of the built-in Echo speaker.
Yeah, that's not true. Okay. So
it's supposed to.
It's not true. So the Echo, my Echo is connected to via Bluetooth to a speaker that's up high, so that it kind of gets more. You tell it to disconnect, it will disconnect, but if that device will become discoverable, and then it'll immediately reconnect.
Oh, it'll immediately.
Yeah, I do that all the time. I do that whenever it used to get like underwatery, like your bad Bluetooth connection. I would tell it to disconnect, and then it would reconnect immediately. That won't work. Oh, yeah. So
you're supposed to have to tell it to connect.
Well,
okay.
I'm just telling you what happens in my house. I mean, your experience might vary, but I'll tell you, in my house,
I told you this is going to be a highly unreliable suggestion, because anything that's depending on connecting and disconnecting from Bluetooth is not going to be a bulletproof solution.
The only way that you can successfully disconnect it from Bluetooth is by turning off the Bluetooth device itself, and then it will sever the connection, and then it will come out of the speaker.
Yeah, so that was literally the only thing I could think of. So actually, out of all of this, I like Tom's suggestion the best, which is you get dedicated speakers to attach to your Echo devices, and you don't worry about using the whole house audio speakers, and you don't worry about the AV receiver. You just have speakers attached to your Echoes, and that's your Echo now.
Yeah. Lastly, he's seen that Amazon streaming music service offers a selection of Atmos music tracks and albums, but no matter what devices he uses, even his newest Fire TV Cube, which plays Atmos from any of the video streaming services just fine, he can't get Atmos music to play. Yeah. He's seen some folks online saying that Amazon Music doesn't support outputting Atmos music to AV receivers yet. Is that true? How are you supposed to hear it if that's the case?
Yeah.
I don't know. Rob?
Yes, and it is the case. The only way you can hear Atmos music from Amazon's Music Unlimited is through an Echo Studio speaker, and that is the only Echo device that does it, is the Echo Studio, or through your phone, iOS or Android. Your phone will do the very, very pseudo 2-channel Atmos effect from your phone's built-in speakers, or obviously what they're aiming for are headphones. It'll do it through headphones from your mobile device or through an Echo Studio speaker or a pair of Echo Studio speakers. Those are the only options right now. We've got the tidbit that it'll be coming to Sonos's new Era 300. That's supposed to be the other device, but that is very similar to an Echo Studio. Yeah. It's the same thing where it's a smart speaker with an upward firing driver. The Echo Studio has an upward firing driver in it. So they are not supporting outputting Atmos music from Amazon Music Unlimited via HDMI from any other devices to an AV receiver or a soundbar. They're just not supporting that yet.
All right, who's left?
On the list, we have Brian, which is too bad. He had some lovely photos that we didn't get to, but we can look forward to that for next week. So that was Brian, and then Ryan and Jay. They are on the list to be first up next week.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank our 140 patrons over at patreon.com, including James.
That is true. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. I forgot what I was saying there because I was looking at the title he just put in there. So thank you very much to our 140 patrons for all of your financial support. James, thank you for being one of them.
I don't even know if I spelled it right. Did I spell it right? It looks like I did.
It didn't put a line under it, so I'm going to assume so.
That's how I know if something's misspelled, because if I could have spelled it right the first time, I would have. We want to thank those who sent us notes of gratitude from Gurinder, Greg, James, Brian, Eddie, and Jorge. Thank you very much for thanking us.
Yes, I'll say the names one more time. Gurinder, Greg, James, Brian, Eddie, and Jorge. Thank you all very much for sending us those notes of gratitude. Your notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. So a big, big thank you to you, and a thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And if you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.